How many broken human destinies were hidden behind the heavy velvet curtains of grand mansions in order to preserve the impeccable reputation of their owners? In an era when outward decorum was valued above truth, the silence of servants was bought not with gold, but with fear of hunger and homelessness. We are accustomed to admiring the glamour of balls and the refinement of manners of that era, forgetting that this glamour was often polished to a shine by the hands of those who were considered invisible. Behind every high-profile social scandal that was successfully hushed up was the quiet tragedy of a maid or footman who took the blame for someone else's sin. These were people whose names have been erased from history, but it was their sacrifice that allowed the aristocracy to save face in front of society. We invite you to take a look behind the scenes of the grand halls and learn stories that were not even whispered aloud. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how one broken cup could cost a woman her future, and why loyalty to one's masters often resulted in a lonely old age and poverty. What if I told you that the most high-profile thefts in noble houses were often just cynical stagings? In the rich interiors of the Age of Splendor, jewels were not just decorations, but symbols of status and power. However, they often became instruments of cruel manipulation that ruined the lives of ordinary servants. Often, the mistress of the house, entangled in card debts or secret spending, was forced to pawn her family diamonds to loan sharks. To hide the loss from her strict husband, a real spectacle was staged with a search for the culprit among the staff. A maid who had access to the boudoir became the perfect target for such accusations, unable to defend herself. She was summoned to the study, where, under the icy gaze of her master, she was accused of theft she did not commit. Her tears and pleas of innocence were met with arrogant distrust and class prejudice. It was easier for the masters to believe in the dishonesty of a servant than to entertain the thought of their own wife's extravagance. Dismissal was instantaneous, often without severance pay and with a black mark that closed the doors to other houses. The police rarely conducted thorough investigations in such cases, preferring to believe the word of a gentleman rather than the excuses of a commoner. The justice system itself was geared toward protecting the interests of the wealthy class, ignoring the presumption of innocence for the poor. The fear of prison caused many girls to simply disappear without trying to fight for their good name. They moved to other cities, changed their names, or sank to the bottom of the social ladder. Their lives were destroyed by a single false word spoken in a luxurious living room amid the clinking of crystal glasses. There were cases when the jewel was miraculously found a few months later, when the scandal had already died down. The mistress might accidentally discover the ring in the lining of her coat or in the depths of her secretary desk. But by that time, the fate of the accused maid had already been irrevocably broken, and no one was going to look for her. Apologizing to the servants was considered unheard of and degrading to the dignity of a noble person. The silent admission of error remained within the walls of the house, never leaving its confines. History knows examples when, decades later, the bitter truth about those events surfaced in diaries and letters. Elderly ladies, sensing the end approaching, tried to confess their sins of youth to paper. But these confessions could no longer restore the youth and hopes of those they had once betrayed. Time mercilessly erased the traces of these dramas, leaving only beautiful portraits in gilded frames. Do you think that in today's world, the practice of shifting blame onto subordinates in order to save face has disappeared? I would be very interested to hear your point of view. Write your thoughts in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how much awkwardness really cost in a millionaire's house? In a world full of fragile things and strict rules, any careless gesture could be fatal. Huge vases, delicate porcelain, and Venetian mirrors adorn the houses, creating an atmosphere of unearthly luxury and beauty. However, this beauty required constant care, and the slightest mistake in handling it was punished mercilessly. But often a broken item was the result not of a maid's clumsiness, but of the mistress's own outburst of anger. The maid summoned to the scene of the crime understood perfectly well the rules of this cruel game and her role in it. She silently lowered her eyes, accepting a torrent of reproaches for something she had not done. It was useless and dangerous to argue, as the mistress's word was law within the walls of this house. The girl knew that any attempt to justify herself would only lead to even greater anger and immediate dismissal. All she could do was apologize for someone else's lack of restraint and hope for mercy. The cost of the broken item was often deducted from the servant's already meager salary, condemning her to months of poverty. For a girl who sent money to her elderly parents in the village, this was a real disaster. She was forced to economize on food and clothing to cover the damage caused by her employer's anger. It was a form of financial slavery, where the worker paid for the right to work in a wealthy household. The injustice of this situation was accepted as an inevitable part of life for people of the lower classes. Sometimes, if the item was particularly expensive or memorable, the matter was not limited to a monetary fine. The master of the house, upset by the loss of a beloved item, could insist on the immediate dismissal of the culprit. The wife, the real culprit of the incident, usually stood nearby, maintaining a sorrowful expression on her face. She did not interfere, allowing her husband to judge the innocent woman, thus saving her own peace of mind. At that moment, a person's fate was being decided, but for the owners of the house, it was merely a matter of business. A woman's broken life was worth less than a broken Ming Dynasty Chinese vase. Things in that world had a soul and a history, while servants were merely replaceable mechanisms. This cold arithmetic determined the relationship between classes, leaving no room for pity. Porcelain shards could be glued back together or replaced, but a maid's reputation could not. Thus, luxury became a silent witness, an accomplice to human baseness. In the next chapter, you will learn what secret, hidden in a postal envelope, could destroy not only a career, but also a life itself. What experts keep quiet about is often hidden in the most mundane things, such as an undelivered letter. In a world of strict moral norms and conventions, love correspondence was the most dangerous occupation for a noble lady. Secret romances, flirtations on the verge of foul play, and forbidden feelings were entrusted to paper and ink. But the delivery of these messages required an intermediary, someone who could slip unnoticed between worlds. This role was often performed by a personal maid, devoted to her mistress and privy to her heart's secrets. An accusation of promiscuity for an unmarried girl in the Victorian era was tantamount to social condemnation. She was not simply dismissed, she was thrown out in disgrace as a fallen woman who had corrupted the household. No excuses were accepted, for a lady's word was indisputable proof of the truth. Men, as a rule, willingly believed in the depravity of maids, considering them morally unstable. Thus, an innocent girl became a lightning rod for family storms, saving her employer's marriage. Often, such stories ended tragically. Unable to find work, the girls really did end up at rock bottom. Society, which rejected them for the sins of others, left them no other choice for survival. Meanwhile, life continued as usual in the mansion, and the mistress wrote new letters, having found a new courier. The cycle of secrets and victims did not stop for a moment, grinding new destinies. Only occasionally could a shadow of sadness be seen in the lady's eyes, which was attributed to migraines. This system of mutual responsibility and lies was the foundation of many perfect Victorian marriages. Behind the facade of respectability lay the broken destinies of those who simply found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. History is silent about how many such silent victims were sacrificed on the altar of family well-being. All that remains are the yellowed pages of novels where everything ends in marriage, not dismissal. Be sure to like this story if you were moved by the invisible price of other people's secrets. What if I showed you a time machine that would take us back to a dinner party that turned into a disaster? In high society, seating guests at the table was not just a formality, but a complex diplomatic task. A mistake in the hierarchy, such as seating a baronet below a count or ignoring a long-standing feud between two families, could cause a scandal. The hostess would pore over the seating plans for hours, trying to take into account all the nuances and subtleties of etiquette. But when a mistake occurred and an important guest felt offended, the lady herself was never to blame. Responsibility for the social fiasco was instantly shifted onto the shoulders of the butler or personal secretary. The hostess publicly reprimanded the servant for allegedly mixing up the cards or misunderstanding her instructions. This allowed her to save face in front of her guests by presenting herself as a victim of her staff's incompetence. The guests, understanding the rules of the game, nodded sympathetically, pretending to believe this version of events. Thus, the hostess's social death was prevented at the cost of the loyal employee's actual career. For the butler, whose reputation had been built on years of impeccable service, this was a crushing blow. His professionalism was called into question in front of all the high society guests present at the dinner. Rumors of his mistakes spread through the salons, making it difficult for him to find employment in a respectable household. A man who knew all the titles and rules by heart was exposed as ignorant and clumsy. It was humiliating, especially when he knew for sure that he had followed the mistress's direct instructions. In such cases, dismissal was immediate, to demonstrate to guests the hostess's determination to restore order. The butler, who often knew the family better than they knew themselves, found himself out on the street. His loyalty and years of impeccable service were erased in one evening of an unsuccessful reception. The host sacrificed him like a pawn in a chess game for social influence. A sense of injustice burned inside him, but the servant's code of honor did not allow him to publicly accuse his mistress of lying. Behind every perfect reception that went down in the annals of high society, there could have been people who had been dismissed. Their tears were not visible behind the glow of the candles and the shine of the silverware. History remembered only the names of the hosts who managed to create an atmosphere of celebration and comfort. Those who provided this comfort at the cost of their future disappeared into the fog of the past. In the next chapter, you will learn how the lack of discipline among the daughters turned into a tragedy for their tutors. A governess in a wealthy home occupied a special, extremely vulnerable position between the servants and the masters. She had to be a lady in her upbringing, but a servant in her status, which in itself created tension. She was responsible for the manners, education, and morality of the young heiresses. But when the results of the education did not meet the parents' expectations, the teacher was always to blame. If a young lady behaved insolently or violated etiquette, it was considered a failure of the governess, not an oversight of the mother. Mothers in high society often paid little attention to their adult daughters, entrusting them to hired workers. They expected the governess to work miracles, turning a spoiled girl into a paragon of virtue. When a debutante made a mistake or showed waywardness at her first ball, her parents' anger was terrible. The mother, wanting to absolve herself of responsibility for her daughter's behavior, accused the governess of being a bad influence. The teacher was reproached for failing to instill proper manners and respect for elders. Often, governesses became victims of the intrigues of their own pupils, who manipulated their parents. A girl could slander a strict teacher in order to get rid of control and gain more freedom. Parents, blindly adoring their child, believed any lie without bothering to check the facts. Justice in the children's room was as rare a guest as it was in the living room. The word of a young heiress weighed more than years of impeccable work by a tutor. An unsuccessful marriage or scandalous affair of the daughter was also blamed on those who were close to her. The governess was accused of overlooking, not reporting, or even indulging the infatuation. No one wanted to admit that the girl had simply repeated the fate or character of her mother. Looking for someone else to blame was a defense mechanism for the pride of the aristocratic family. It allowed them to feel flawless, despite obvious family problems. The governess herself lived in constant tension, aware of the precariousness of her position in the house. She had to be strict but loved, demanding but submissive to the will of the parents. This impossible balance often led to nervous breakdowns and professional burnout. But she could not show weakness, as this could also be a reason for dismissal. She had to be an iron lady in a cheap wool dress. The fate of these women reminds us how easily society grinds down those who have no protection. Behind every brilliant appearance of a young lady stood the shadow of her mentor, a shadow that dissolved into the twilight, leaving the spotlight for others. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how accounts were actually kept in wealthy estates? The financial side of life in a large house was a confusing maze in which it was easy to get lost or hide the ends. The lady of the house, responsible for managing the budget, often spent more than her husband could afford. Expensive fabrics, secret charity, or simply an inability to count money led to huge holes in the budget. To hide the deficit from her husband, a scapegoat was needed, and most often it was the cook or housekeeper. Accusations of embezzlement or padding the kitchen books were a standard way to explain the shortage of funds. The lady claimed that the cook was overcharging for food and pocketing the difference. Indeed, there was a tradition of cook's privileges, small commissions from merchants which were overlooked. But when it was necessary to cover up the mistress's large expenditures, these trifles were blown up to the scale of a serious crime. The woman was accused of stealing from the family that had given her shelter and work. Dismissal for dishonesty was a sentence that permanently closed the door to good work. Rumors about a dishonest cook spread instantly, depriving her of trust in the neighborhood. A woman who had fed the family for years and knew all their tastes found herself thrown out like a criminal. No one cared about her tears or the accounting books she had kept honestly. The master believed his wife, and the wife saved herself from scandal and financial hardship. The very system of household management was opaque and based on trust, which created fertile ground for abuse. Honest servants often became hostages to the dishonesty of their masters, unable to prove their innocence. They could not hire an auditor or a lawyer. Their word against that of a nobleman was worthless. All they could do was humbly accept the blow, hoping that God saw everything. But God was high above, and the bills for housing had to be paid on earth. This chapter of history shows us the underside of a luxurious life, where money decided everything and people decided nothing. Behind every lavish dinner and starched tablecloth could lie someone's broken path through life. We see the glitter of silver, but we do not see the tears shed over it. And this is the main tragedy of an era that knew how to hide its vices beautifully. In the next chapter, you will learn why the absence of a letter of recommendation was more frightening than hunger and cold. In a world where there were no labor codes or unions, a letter of recommendation was the only document that guaranteed survival. This piece of paper, written by the hand of a former mistress, was the key to the doors of a new home. Without it, a servant became a vagrant, a person with no past and no future, suspicious to everyone. The power to write or not write a recommendation was limitless and often used as a weapon. It was a tool of blackmail, keeping people obedient and silent. Refusal to provide a recommendation, character, was the most terrible punishment an employer could inflict. It was often used not for poor work performance, but for knowing too much or refusing to participate in intrigues. If a maid saw something she shouldn't have, the threat of not getting a letter kept her quiet. It was a leash that kept the entire staff, from the cook to the butler, in line. Fear of the future outweighed the desire for justice or revenge. Blackmail with references was also used to keep valuable employees on low wages. If you leave, I won't give you a reference. This phrase shut down any talk of a raise or better conditions. Servants endured years of humiliation and hard labor for fear of losing the coveted paper. It was a form of serfdom in the era of industrial progress and enlightenment. People were tied to the house not by land, but by fear of social death. Young girls were particularly vulnerable, for whom the first recommendation was a ticket to life. If their first experience ended badly due to the whims of the mistress, their career ended before it began. They had to take the dirtiest and lowest paid jobs where no papers were asked for. Laundries, factories, or even the streets became their lot because of someone else's malice. Their shattered dreams of decent service in a good house were left in the past. Losing a recommendation was equivalent to losing your passport in a foreign country without knowing the language. A person became invisible, a shadow gliding through the streets in search of a piece of bread. This was the price they paid for daring to displease their masters. Why were mistresses, who often suffered from social restrictions themselves, so cruel to their servants? The answer lies in the psychology of the golden cage in which the women of high society lived at that time. They themselves had no rights before their husbands and fathers, and their fate depended on a successful marriage. The only area where they had any power was in managing the household and servants, and often they took out their pain, fear, and dissatisfaction on those below them. Shifting the blame onto the maid was a way to regain the illusion of control over their own lives. When a woman could not argue with her tyrannical husband, she took it out on the silent maid. It was a transfer of aggression, a psychological defense mechanism of a weak psyche. The servant became a lightning rod, taking the blow intended for fate or the spouse. Cruelty begat cruelty, descending the social ladder from top to bottom. In addition, the mistresses sincerely believed in their own superiority and their right to dispose of the fates of ordinary people. Class prejudices were absorbed with their mother's milk. Servants were considered creatures of a different kind. Their feelings, pain, and problems were not taken seriously, just as the feelings of furniture are not taken seriously. It was inconceivable to a lady that dismissal could be a tragedy for a maid because she was just staff. Empathy rarely crossed class boundaries, remaining the privilege of equals. The fear of losing status was the main driver of the behavior of women from high society. Any shadow on their reputation could lead to ostracism, loss of invitations, and advantageous matches for their daughters. Therefore, they were willing to sacrifice anyone in order to maintain the facade of prosperity. The instinct for social self-preservation drowned out the voice of conscience and compassion. It was a struggle for survival in the jungle of high society, where the weak were devoured. Any feelings of guilt, if they arose at all, were quickly suppressed by justifications of necessity and order. Women convinced themselves that they had done the right thing by protecting the interests of their families and clans. Religion and morality at that time were often interpreted in a way that suited the rich. Public charity atoned for sins committed in the quiet of the home office. It was possible to give money to a shelter, but to throw a pregnant maid out onto the street. Isolation in luxurious mansions contributed to the development of paranoia and suspicion. Housewives thought that servants were spying on them, stealing, and talking behind their backs. This created an atmosphere of mistrust in which any misunderstanding was interpreted against the servants. The enemy was inside the house and had to be kept in fear and submission. This eternal war with their own lives exhausted and embittered their souls. History judges them differently, but the pain caused by their decisions was real and tangible. The echoes of these dramas can still be heard if you listen to the silence of old houses. What happened to those who were expelled from paradise with a wolf ticket in their hands? The fate of a maid dismissed without a recommendation was one of the darkest stories of that time. Cheap lodgings in disadvantaged areas of the city often became their first refuge. Here, amid the filth and cramped conditions, the former inhabitants of palaces faced the harsh reality of poverty. Their savings, if they had any, melted away at an alarming rate, spent on food and a place to sleep. Attempts to find new work were met with a wall of refusal when references were requested. The women agreed to any-day labor, washing clothes, cleaning dirty rooms, sewing for pennies. Their delicate hands, accustomed to fine porcelain and lace, became rough from lye and ice-cold water. The pride and poise developed over years of service in high society were broken under the weight of sacks and buckets. It was a slow decline, a loss of human dignity in the struggle for survival. Some tried to return to their native villages, but there they often received a cold welcome. Families who had counted on the help of their rich relative from the city saw her as a freeloader and a failure. The shame before their neighbors and relatives was unbearable, forcing many to flee back to the city. The severing of ties with their roots left them completely alone in a vast and different world. They became tumbleweeds, driven by the winds of necessity. Workhouses were the last resort for those who had completely lost hope and strength. These were grim institutions, more like prisons, where hard labor was required in exchange for meager food. Being sent there was considered a disgrace that could not be washed away for the rest of one's life. The living conditions there were appalling: cold, disease, harsh discipline, and a complete lack of personal space. Many preferred to starve to death on the streets rather than suffer the humiliation of a workhouse. These women disappeared from life as if dissolving into the fog of the streets of London or New York. They became part of the urban dust, the invisible foundation of great cities. Their fates are a silent rebuke to an era that valued things above people. We must remember them in order to understand the true price of historical splendor. Behind every great house stood an invisible line of ghosts of those who had been expelled. Even those servants who served in one house all their lives and were not dismissed often ended their days sadly. The myth of the loyal old servant who lived out his days peacefully in the gatekeeper's cottage was rare. In reality, when a servant grew old and lost his strength, he became a burden to his masters. Pensions did not exist at that time, and the maintenance of the elderly depended solely on the goodwill of their masters. And that goodwill often changed with the death of the old master and the arrival of a young heir. The new generation, having no sentimental attachment to nannies and butlers, viewed them as unnecessary expenses. The elderly were dismissed with a small severance payment, which was not enough to last long. A person who had given 40 or 50 years to the house found himself unnecessary, thrown out onto the sidelines of life. He lost not only his job, but also his home, his family, albeit someone else's, and his reason for living. The loyalty he considered his main virtue turned out to be of no use to anyone. The loneliness of old servants was total, as they often did not have families of their own. Their whole lives were devoted to serving others, and they did not have time to build their own homes. They lived through other people's joys, nursed other people's children, and mourned other people's dead. And when this alien world rejected them, they were left with complete emptiness. The realization that their lives had passed them by, spent in the service of ungrateful people, was bitter and devastating. It was a betrayal that stretched out over time, quiet and unnoticed by those around them. We do not see these people in ceremonial portraits, but they stand there in the shadows, behind the chairs of the masters. Their invisible hands hold up this world that crushed them, and their silence speaks louder than any words of accusation. We have walked with you through the corridors of time, peeking behind the closed doors of the glittering mansions of the Victorian era and the Gilded Age. We have seen that behind the outward beauty and order lay a cruel system that crushed human destinies. Servants were not just household helpers. They were a living shield that took the blows of fate intended for their masters. Their sacrifice, whether forced or voluntary, was the foundation on which the impeccable reputation of the aristocracy was built. Broken lives, lost hopes, lonely old age, such was the price for the right to be close to the powerful of this world. History is often unfair to little people, forgetting their names and remembering only those they served. But it is in their fates that the real truth about that time lies, a time of great beauty and great cruelty. Would you like to see more on this topic and learn about the fates of those who managed to break free from this system and achieve success? Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about the hidden sides of the past.